kind of off the earth, it was a very dangerous time. And having anxiety is what kept people safe. So anxiety is a safety measure. Typically, when we experience anxiety, our brain goes into something called the fight, flight, or flee response, or freeze. Fight, freeze. Fight, flee, freeze. There's lots of ways to say it. It's a tongue twister. But this is when our brain typically does one of these three things to respond to a dangerous situation, and that is to keep us safe. So if you're being attacked, you want your body to fight back as hard as possible. If you're being chased by a wild animal, you want to be able to run as fast as possible. Freeze, if you're needing to hide and be quiet, you want your body to shut down. So in those situations, what happens is the rest of our brain shuts down, and only a certain part of our brain, the primitive part of our brain, takes over, so that all of our energy and effort can go into protecting ourselves and keeping us safe, so that we cannot really think about other things when we're in that state. This is why you cannot reason with children who are in a full-on panic, because their brains don't have the ability to think and reason during that time. It's very focused on that primitive response. So what most of us do think of when we hear anxiety is more of an anxiety disorder, or when anxiety becomes excessive or abnormal. So it's a disorder when it interferes with normal functioning. For children, that's typically school, home, and friendships, relationships. For adults, that's work and home and relationships. So if the anxiety is so excessive that it gets in the way of those things, then that's a problem, and it becomes disordered anxiety if that problem continues over time. So like if I have a big thing to do at work, I might have anxiety about it to make sure I get it done. If I stop going to work because I'm so anxious about it whenever that happens, that's a problem because it interferes with my ability to function typically. So there are a lot of different types of anxiety disorders. These are not all of them. It's not exhaustive, but this is most of them. And the most common in children are the top three. Separation anxiety is most common in very young children when they have a difficult time separating from parents, maybe when they're first starting school. There's a normal adjustment period where kids have a hard time with that, but if that continues where they have such an anxious response over even the thought of separating from their parents, and that response continues over time, then that can be a separation anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety is common in younger kids, and as kids get older, it typically turns into a social anxiety. So a general anxiety is when people have anxiety over things like bad things happening or something's going to go wrong. It could be about weather or going on trips or bugs or different, like lots of different worries. And so it's usually that something bad will happen. That's the worry or fear. So then as kids get older, it makes sense. What's most important to kids starting middle school and high school is relationships and peers and what other people think. And so that's when social anxiety is more common in older kids. And social anxiety is an anxiety that is really just geared toward social situations, meeting new people, going into rooms with a lot of people, going new places where you won't know anyone or where you don't know the place. The rest of them are a lot more rare in young children. So panic disorder, if you've heard of panic attacks, when anxiety gets so severe that it causes a panic attack and you just have panic a lot of the times. Obsessive compulsive disorder, it's not very common in children, but it is something that is an anxiety-based disorder. So a lot of times kids will have general or social anxiety And as adults, it can kind of turn into or morph into other kinds of disorders like obsessive compulsive disorder. Phobias would be what you know of, like claustrophobia, being afraid of closed spaces, or some people are afraid to leave their home, or some people are only afraid of spiders or bugs. Arachnophobia, I definitely have that. I'm not a fan of spiders. Selective mutism is a form of anxiety where children speak in certain situations and not others. It's not common in adults, it's mostly childhood, and typically by adulthood people are able to work their way out of that. But you may have kids who sometimes will talk to family members and other times won't speak at all. So I work with 2 kids right now who have selective mutism, and so it's a pretty extreme form of anxiety where there's so much anxiety that they just shut down and stop speaking in situations that make them anxious.
Is that an actual DSM diagnosis?
It is.
That must be more.
Yeah. So I actually had never worked with kids with selective mutism or met any in the schools until this year, and then I had 2 at one time, which is surprising.
So I was working with a student who like somebody said it, and I was like, I didn't know that was a.
Yeah. You don't hear about it a lot. It's not super common. So anxiety in children, the statistics about it, which we'll get to, are kind of iffy because it's really what's diagnosed is what the statistics are, not what actually occurs or happens. So the thing with children is that they just don't have the ability to recognize and report things the way that adults do. So if I'm feeling really depressed, I can go to the doctor and be like, yeah, I'm just feeling really down, crying all the time for no reason, I don't want to get out of bed. I can really explain what's going on. Or if I'm feeling really anxious, I can explain what that feeling is. And kids, especially young kids, they really don't know that yet. They don't know how to recognize and identify what's going on. They just know feelings that they don't like, that are very unpleasant. So it can come out in lots of different ways for kids. And so usually seeing it through their actions and behaviors is the way that it really comes to light in children, more than children telling people about it. Of course, as kids get older, they learn more about it. So middle school and high school kids are better able to explain having depression or anxiety. And that is becoming more common too, because people are talking about mental health more in schools and in society. And so kids have a better vocabulary for those things than they used to have. So what you see in kids can be in young children or older children. The only difference really is that older children, you see more skipping classes in school and more substance use, and you don't see that in young children. The rest of the symptoms or signs can be in kids of any age. So extreme shyness is a form of anxiety. When kids are just very, very shy, that's anxiety. The biggest telltale is avoiding things. So when kids don't like something, they don't want to do it. They want to avoid it. So if kids are constantly trying to avoid certain things or situations, that's a sign that there's something going on there that they want to, why they want to avoid that. So kids who have a lot of anxiety about school will often try not to go to school or won't go to school. They'll be sick or they'll refuse or they'll skip. Acting out. Very young children especially, you'll see behavioral acting out because that's how they express themselves. So you might see tantrums, yelling, crying. You know, when I work with kids in school who have a lot of anxiety over their schoolwork, guess what they do when it's time to do schoolwork? They start to act out, get sent out of the classroom maybe. So what happens? They don't have to do their schoolwork. So these are all kind of ways that kids are avoiding the things that cause them anxiety. Defiance, refusing to do schoolwork or go to school or go to a certain place can be a sign of avoidance. Kids who are not finishing their schoolwork, not doing well in school, getting poor grades, those can be symptoms of anxiety. Difficulty paying attention or focusing. Often when that's seen in schools, the first thing people worry about is like an attention deficit problem, ADHD. But it can also be a huge symptom of anxiety. If children are worrying about something all the time, having anxiety about what's going to happen or different situations, that's what their brain is focused on, then they're not able to pay attention in school or in the classroom. So it might look like kids who just can't focus or can't pay attention, but it's possible that anxiety is actually causing that. Stomach aches or headaches. Again, that can happen with all kids, but especially with younger kids because as adults, I know the difference between my stomach hurting when I eat something bad or when I'm really hungry or have the flu versus anxiety and like, you know, that tight feeling in your stomach. But for young kids, what is it all the time? Your stomach just hurts. So it can come out a lot as having headaches or having an upset stomach can be a sign. So especially if you see that happening in any kind of pattern, like kids are always having stomach aches when something certain is happening, that's more a sign of anxiety. If they're having it a lot and there's no reason, then definitely that's something you want to get medically checked out because kids can have problems with migraines or, you know, allergies or different things that can cause stomach problems or headaches. But if it seems more of a response to something and you can see a pattern, then it's possible that that's actually a symptom of anxiety. Problem sleeping is huge for kids of all age. The anxious brain doesn't shut down. It keeps worrying and it keeps them from going to sleep. Withdrawing, avoiding being around other people. If you feel really anxious, you're not feeling good, you don't want to be around other people. Especially if you have anxiety about other people, you really don't want to be around other people. So withdrawing can be a sign of that. Having poor self-esteem is one symptom of having anxiety. Kids with anxiety, especially older kids with social anxiety, are very worried about what other people think about them, other people's judgments, if they're doing good enough, if they're going to mess up at something, what other people will think. And so that can lead to a lot of poor self-esteem. Difficulty being apart from parents can be a general anxiety, but also a separation anxiety, especially for younger kids. Anxious kids may be really sensitive. They may cry a lot more. They may be a lot more sensitive to feedback or criticism, even when it's not criticism. If it's just, oh, you forgot to do this. For a very anxious child, that is a criticism, even though it was never intended to be one. And so you might see a lot of sensitivity in children with anxiety.
About sensitivity to sound.
It can be. It's not as common. So you can have like sensory sensitivities with anxiety if you're afraid of like an anxiety of something bad happening. Like, what was that? What happened? But if it's just like a physical sensitivity, like I don't like sound, that's more likely something else. That's not super common with anxiety. So the anxiety over sounds would be, what was it? Like,
it was,
what happened? What's going on? What was that noise? Is it something bad?
well, it could have been a situation where there was just too many people too, and then the noise on
Feeling
top of it.
overwhelmed, yes. Yes, being easily overwhelmed can definitely be a symptom of anxiety. So if there's just a lot going on, the hard thing about a lot of these symptoms is that it's like when you had COVID and you'd go to the doctor and they'd say, have you felt this, this, or this? And I'm like, well, yes, every day I'm tired. And yes, I have allergies, so every day I have a cough and a runny nose. That's kind of what it's like for symptoms of these. It can be a symptom of anxiety. It can also be symptoms of ADHD or an autism disorder or depression. So there are a lot of things that share symptoms. And so really, no one thing can point to anxiety. But seeing several things together, recognizing patterns, can kind of give a picture of what it might be. Seeking a lot of reassurance. I think we've covered most of this. Anyone have thoughts, questions about any of those things?
So hyperactivity is on there.
Yeah.
But then, so like, how do you see that play out? Because it's kind of like contradictory to extreme shyness and avoiding things and being easily overwhelmed.
Yep. So really young kids, when they feel anxiety, it's like a physical sensation in the body, and it can just feel kind of like, I don't even know the word to explain it, but like antsy or like uncomfortable.
I think if you're, sorry,
No, please.
if you're feeling anxious, it's hard to like focus. Like, you know, if I'm too busy worrying about what's gonna happen after school, then me sitting here trying to do my homework is hard because my brain's over there, and that can be a little. Sorry,
No, you're absolutely right.
I am.
So the hyperactivity and moving around can kind of be for different reasons. One, because of that physical feeling, just feeling uncomfortable and wanting to just move and not sit with that, because sitting with an uncomfortable feeling is not fun, especially for kids. They hate it. They will do anything to avoid that. So moving around can be a way of trying to like cope with that physical feeling, but also moving around a lot can help with avoiding whatever's going on that's causing them anxiety. And so they are opposites, and that's the thing, is that they can come out in very opposite ways in different children. And that happens with a lot of things. Like when you think of depression, you think of kids who withdraw and they don't talk and they cry a lot and they want to be alone. But on the other hand, for males who are having depression, what you actually see is a lot of acting out and getting in trouble. It looks like the total opposite thing, but they're both caused by depression. So that's what makes it hard, and why going through the process of getting an accurate diagnosis is important, because there are a lot of things that need to be considered and ruled out for any mental health diagnosis, especially in kids. Because like we talked about, some things are normal and normal amounts, and we don't want to label that as bad or unhealthy. We want kids to experience negative things because that's how they learn how to cope and deal with it. So we want them to have times where they feel really sad when sadness is appropriate, or when they feel really anxious when it's appropriate. So it's tough with kids. That's the joy of working with them. You never know what you're gonna get. So anxiety is really common in all people, but in children. Am I standing right in your way? I can only change it at the computer over here, so I'm standing here. It's the most common emotional problem in children, and it is more commonly diagnosed in females. Does that mean it happens more? I don't know. Males are traditionally not identified having these problems as much as females, so it may just be a diagnosing issue. Anxiety and depression often go together. I like to say they're kind of like siblings, brother and sister. I think statistically it's like 75 to 80% of the time that you have one, you also have the other. They're very commonly linked. In the US, 9.4% of children had a diagnosis of anxiety. That's the last CDC statistic, which I think is from 2021. So 1 in 3 also had behavior problems. So like we talked about, especially with younger kids, anxiety often comes out behaviorally. And 1 in 3 also had depression, very common. As kids get older, the the diagnosis of anxiety increases. They're more likely to get identified as they get older. It's harder to identify in really young children. It's increased a lot over time. So this started, everyone's heard about how COVID has been awful for everyone, but for kids especially, and for anxiety and depression especially. But before COVID even started, anxiety and depression in kids has been on the rise for a long time. So over this 4-year period, 27% increase, and that's a lot. So that's been going on for quite a while. Well, then COVID came. Boom. Sorry, was someone saying something? No? Okay. COVID came and kind of double whammy, made that even worse. So why does that happen? What's going on that is increasing it so much? Well, a few things. Maybe we're just noticing it more, talking about it more, and diagnosing it more. That's very possible. There's no way to go back in time and say in the past how accurate we've been at diagnosing those things in children. So that's always something to take into account. As there are more adults with anxiety in the US, there's also going to be more kids with anxiety. Anxiety is genetic, it's passed on genetically, but also through the environment, how you're raised. So if you are raised by a parent who is very anxious, what do you learn growing up? You learn to be worried and to be anxious about things. So it's passed on through their parenting as well. We have an earlier onset of puberty now in kids. I think it went from, it's like from 14 down to 12 in girls or something crazy. As you can see, if you're around kids or working with kids and you're like, holy crap, they're growing up fast nowadays. Well, they are. So they're hitting puberty and their bodies are going through these changes and they're recognizing things differently, but their brains are not developing faster. So children's brains are not yet ready to process, comprehend, and kind of cope with and deal with all the things that come with puberty. So that's difficult for kids. You know, kids' brains develop till after they're kids. We used to think like, oh, 18, they're an adult. But research has shown no, that the rapid development of the brain in children goes on into the early mid-20s. And so when they're very young, they're still in a very early stage of brain development. And the brain gets easily overwhelmed. The children's brains do. So social media. So that could be a whole conversation, discussion on its own. Social media has had such a huge impact on children in so many ways. So many. So, to name a few, I'm sure you guys can. What's your experience? Kids are connected all the time. Kids are having more experiences of comparing themselves to others all the time. Kids are having more experiences of worrying about how they fit in and what they look like and how other people look and what other people are doing. You know, being picked on goes from when I was growing up, it was during school and then you could go home to your safe place. Now, if kids are connected to social media, it's all the time. It doesn't end, it keeps going. There are so many ways. So there's a lot of research about how social media has really impacted children and been very bad for depression and anxiety. Like all things, moderation is key. And so if it's used in moderation, there can be positive things about it and good things about it. But overuse causes a lot of negative things. Has a huge impact on kids' self-esteem and a huge impact on their anxiety and depression. So having a social media plan for your family, having rules around it, it's really good for kids. Kids don't know how to identify what's good and bad for them. That's why they have parents to make rules, and they usually hate the rules, right? If kids could pick, they might have candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, and they'd all end up with diabetes. But we as adults know that's not healthy. Even though it's fun and you love it, you can't do it. And so it's kind of the same for anything, TV, video games, social media. It's very important to have structure and rules around it. And for a lot of families that doesn't happen. A lot of the kids I work with, there's a huge overuse of social media. And also, of course, COVID impacted social media use because kids went from being in school all day to being home with devices all day. So modern adolescence, it's kind of related to what we talked about with the early onset of puberty is just think about society and things that are going on in the social sphere these days that were not happening when some of us were young and children. You know, when I was in middle school and junior high, worried about sports and who your friends were and if you were invited to a get-together or party or not, and that was really it. I was not faced with big decisions about, you know, it's like almost like an identity crisis about my identity and who I am and who I'm meant to be and who I want to be and what I'm going to be, because children's brains cannot process that. They're not ready to fully understand what that is and process through it. So it's like when you go to college, most people who go to college decide what they want to be, and it's only like 20% of people end up working in a career in the field they went to school for. So even by that age, we're not always quite ready to decide who we are in the grand scheme of life. So if you just think about a young child hearing all these things, it's a lot. That's overwhelming. And I'm not saying that there's any stance or good or bad. I'm just saying just think about how much information that kids are getting and taking in and having to think about and make decisions about that weren't there before. So there's a huge change in society and our structure that really affects children and tends to increase anxiety, having to think about all that and make big decisions at an early age. Teens now, they get less sleep overall, less exercise, they spend less time in person and more time on screens, and all of those things are really important for kids to have for healthy development. And so that happens to younger kids too, not just teens, but sleep is so important. Sleep is a huge underlying factor in depression and anxiety in kids, getting proper sleep. So then all of this already going on, then COVID came. For kids, having structure and routine is super important. It's how kids learn and develop, and it's a way that kids feel safe is having a structure. And when COVID happened and that was all changed, it was a huge drastic change in a very quick amount of time, and all of their routine and structure was gone. So if you think about just for us as adults, how much unpredictability we had, who knew when you could go out, when you could go back to work? Kids didn't know when they could see friends, when they could go back to school. So that was hard for us as adults. Well, now think of kids who do not have the capacity to process and cope with things the way that we do as adults. So that anxiety was increased exponentially for them. Social isolation, so important for teenagers, middle school kids now and high school kids. All they want, right? Friends, talk to friends, be around friends, play games with friends. It's so important. And so kids were forced into a social isolation, and that was very hard on them. Fear, there was a lot of fear about what was going on and people getting sick and dying and how that's caused and a lot of unknown things. So that is why COVID was so tough on kids, especially for increasing anxiety. Depression and anxiety went up the most out of all the disorders throughout the COVID pandemic. Okay, so this is all really depressing so far. Lots of sad news for our kids. Okay, the good news is that anxiety is a 100% treatable condition, and that's awesome news. therapy is the best form of treatment for anxiety. Something called cognitive behavioral therapy is research backed to be the best treatment. The next step would be medications. Medication can address therapy, or can address anxiety. I would say that kids should be in therapy and on medication. That's proven to be the best treatment to have both if they're on meds. Kids should not ever be on medication and not in therapy to work on the issue, because what happens then is they still never learn the skills they need to learn to address it, and they become medication dependent. And then, you know, we build tolerance, so that just increases throughout life. So the goal is not to, you know, get them totally reliant on meds. It's to use medication to give them the opportunity to learn the skills they need to cope with it in therapy. So having both of them together is really important. So kind of an overview of how it's treated throughout therapy. First of all, kids learning about what anxiety is, what's going on in their brain when they feel anxious, how does it feel in their body, where do they feel it in their body, really learning to recognize it so that when they experience it, they know what's going on. And learning to identify different emotions. What do you get when you ask kids how things are going?
Good.
Good, bad, fine. They're not super good at learning and knowing different emotions. And so that's something that's important for them to learn, the differences between different feelings, and not just good, bad, and fine. Or shrugs, a lot of shrugs. Mm-hmm. How was school? Mm-hmm. Physical coping. So anxiety is a physical response, and kids need to learn how to physically manage those feelings of anxiety and how to regulate them and bring them down. So using relaxation skills, and we'll talk more about that. Meditation, mindfulness, that's like a big buzzword recently, but basically mindfulness is learning how to be in the present. And what happens when kids have anxiety is their brain is in the future, not the present, because they're worried about what will happen, what could happen, what's going to happen. So mindfulness is a way to teach the brain how to be in the present and not in the past or in the future. And then next, kids learn cognitive coping or mental coping. They learn how to work through it in their brain. So our brains are really amazing, and they can learn new things all through life. They never stop growing and changing. So we have the ability to change things that are wired in our brain. It takes a lot of work. If you've done one thing one way your whole life and you try and switch it up, it's not easy and it's not fun, right? Like, any parents who tried to figure out how to do math with their kids when it changed after we have done it one way our whole lives? It's not easy to learn something new, but if you work on something and practice it a lot, it's very possible. So this is just basically reteaching the brain of a child with anxiety how to notice those anxious, worried thoughts, how to investigate them. So when you think something like, what, oh, I have to walk into the cafeteria of a bunch of kids, I'm going to trip and fall and everyone's going to laugh at me. That's a very anxious, unrealistic thought. So how do you investigate that? Well, what's happened before when I walked into the cafeteria? What happens to other kids who walk into the cafeteria? What happens to kids who have tripped and fallen? So you have to really learn how to investigate thoughts and think through them in order to come up with a more realistic thought. So a more realistic thought would be, I could trip, but I never have before, so it's not likely. And if I do, kids usually laugh and then they forget about it after, 5 minutes. That's a realistic thought that helps relieve that anxiety about something bad happening. So teaching that process to kids and practicing it a whole lot is part of the treatment process. So what are relaxation and coping skills? Well, what are yours? What do you do to relax and cope with difficult things?
Hide in the basement.
Time to yourself, okay. Yeah, take time to yourself. What else?
Work out.
Exercise, work out. Yeah,
Be outside.
go outside.
We're only saying the positive or the healthy ones. We're
Yeah,
not
let's
saying
see.
the things that, like eating all the candy and
You
drinking
can't. All
the
things in
things.
moderation.
Drinking.
Have a drink. Take a bath. Take a bath. Have a glass of wine. Read a book. That's relaxing to me. I find coloring relaxing. When I color, I kind of get into it and stop thinking about other things. Venting to friends. I feel better after I vent to them. I take my dog for a walk. All these things help relax me. So a relaxation skill is different for everyone because some kids will love coloring and some kids will be like, oh, I'm not going to color. That's not fun for them, so it's not relaxing, right? So it really varies from child to child. So we have to help kids learn to identify what works for them and find a few things that work. So it can be all kinds of things, artistic things, exercise things, reading, writing in a journal, regulating things. So things that are, it's hard to explain, things that are like constant are very regulating for kids who are dysregulated. So something as simple as bouncing a ball back and forth, hitting a balloon back and forth. So anything that is like kind of a repetitive, regular motion helps kids regulate their feelings. So anything that includes that can be a great coping skill for kids. Even drinking cold water is found to physically relax the body. Swinging, some kids like to sing, some like to dance. So you kind of find what works for different kids and help teach them to practice what works for them. And that can be for all kinds of feelings. That doesn't have to just be for feeling anxious. It can be for when they're very frustrated and angry or when they're extremely sad. So it's really teaching kids how to physically calm intense feelings that they have. There's a lot of research proven things. Deep breathing is the most important, and all the kids hate doing it. I don't know why, but so finding a fun way to teach kids how to do deep breathing, because it is a physically proven way to add oxygen to your bloodstream, which calms down your heart rate, which calms down your breathing. So it decreases anxiety just by taking actual deep breaths. So that's one thing we work on a lot. Exercise is huge for depression, anxiety, being outside, getting fresh air and sunshine. Meditation is huge. Of course, all kids hear that and they're like, I'm not going to sit like, they hate it. But they actually have so many fun meditations now. If you do a search on YouTube, there's like 5 million. You can find ones as short as like 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes. I am a little ADHD. I cannot just sit in silence and meditate. So I do guided meditations. So I need someone to tell me what to visualize. Otherwise, my brain's going to be like, grocery shopping, what am I doing at work tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. Right? It's going crazy. But if I'm listening to one and they're telling me what to imagine, what to picture, the more I practice it, I can get into that. I can handle that, and they're short. So when we teach kids that they don't have to be awful, they can be short, and they can be really nice and relaxing, get them to do it. So there's a ton of research that shows that if you practice meditation every day, you have all these benefits. Decreased depression, decreased anxiety, decreased stress, better sleep, better, just all kinds of stuff. It's very good for people. So if you haven't tried it, there's like tons of apps you can download. You can do the free version of ones or pay for the expensive version. I use the app Calm a lot for short meditations. Yoga is a great one, and that can be fun because it has fun names. So if you're teaching kids like oh, be like a tree or a cat or a dog. Sometimes they get into that. That can be fun for them. A grounding technique, there are a lot of those, and what that means is to physically ground kids to the present. So like when you're having a lot of anxiety, your brain is not where you're at. It's all over. And so you want to bring it to where you are. So like one technique is your 5 senses. So I'll have kids, if they're really anxious about something, tell me 5 things that you see right now. Tell me 4 things that you hear right now. Tell me 3 things that you physically feel with your senses right now. Because they have to be in the present to think about that. They have to be in this room to pick out 5 things. So that brings their brain back from the anxious state to the present. There's lots of other ones. Pick your favorite thing in the room and tell me what you like about it. Pick the prettiest thing that you see, and I'm not going to look at it. Describe it to me so I can picture it. So anything that makes kids really focus on their physical surroundings. Visualization is great for kids. Learning how to control visualization in the brain, which is part of, I think, why meditation is so good, because with practice, it teaches people to control what their brain thinks about. And what happens with anxiety disorders, we feel out of control of what our brain is focusing on and thinking about. So the practice of learning to control what our brain is focusing on or thinking about is good in so many ways. So if we can visualize things, that can help decrease anxiety. We can visualize positive things happening. We can visualize a happy memory. That helps decrease anxiety. So just learning to use the brain to visualize can really help out. So what can people do at home? What can parents do? Well, the first thing is that anxiety is very common. Lots of people have it. So if a parent has it and is struggling with it, seek treatment. That helps in many ways. 1, you become less anxious as a parent. 2, you pass less anxiety on to your kids. 3, you model that it's okay to struggle with something and get help for it. So it's good in a lot of ways to do that. The next thing is really helping kids to identify their feelings and what's going on in their bodies. And how we do that really is we just kind of verbally tell them. So like, it seems like you're getting really frustrated over that homework assignment. Okay, the more you do that, kids are like, oh, this is what I'm feeling, frustrated. And they learn to connect those things. Or you really wanted to go with your friend today and you didn't get to. I know you're very disappointed right now. It seems like you're a little worried about this trip that you're going on. So kind of giving names for them helps them learn how to give names to their own experiences. And then you model how to cope with it. So first you show them healthy coping skills. You model them. So maybe if I'm like in session, I will pretend to get really upset about something with the young kids, and I'll be like, oh, I'm so frustrated about this. I just need to take a deep breath for a minute. Okay? And so then I'll do that, and just showing them how I handle it teaches them also how to handle those situations. So when you're really mad at something, you're arguing with your kids, you can be like, I'm getting so upset or I'm angry, I need to take a breath and I need to take 10 minutes to myself to go, read a book or call my friend, whatever. And that's good because you're actually modeling for them how to handle difficult feelings and situations. Don't tell them you hide a bottle of wine in your room, but no, I'm just kidding. I like wine. So helpful self-talk, talking out loud. So a lot of this is just walking through and talking it through for kids. So if you're worried about something, you might talk through that whole thing with your kid. Like, well, I'm worried about this trip because if this could happen, but you know what? If that did happen, it would be okay because then I could just, go to the store and buy a new whatever, or I could call someone for help, and so I'm not going to worry about it. I'm okay with that. So kind of talking through that process also helps teach kids how to go through that process themselves. So it's a lot of modeling for kids how to handle anxiety. Acknowledge and validate their feelings. So if they're really anxious about something, even if it seems really unreal or crazy or ridiculous to us, we want to say, I understand you're feeling really anxious about that, and I know that doesn't feel good. Because it is real to them. What they feel is very real, and so validating that for them is very important. But to follow up with that, the next step is to not allow avoidance. So avoidance is the #1 unhealthy way to cope with anxiety, because people want to avoid anxiety, and so they avoid it. They realize, hey, I didn't have to deal with it. That felt really good. So what are they going to do next time? Avoid. And then they start avoiding things more and more. And the more they avoid the things they're afraid of, the more afraid they become. So anxiety starts to grow and grow, and people start to avoid and withdraw more and more. So this is why untreated anxiety disorders can often turn into something much more significant or severe, like a panic disorder or OCD or something more significant, because if you don't treat it and learn the skills earlier on, it will continue to grow. So avoidance is what kids want to do, and we have to not let them, because it's actually really bad for them. What helps is facing it and going through it, and that's very hard to do, but you can do that in gentle and gradual ways. So our brain learns through experience that we can handle something. So if we're feeling anxious, if kids are feeling anxious about it, you want to validate it. I understand that you're feeling that way. I get that this is really hard to do. So what are some coping skills we can use together to help kind of bring down that anxiety? And then how can we approach it to make it better? You're worried about going to this event because there's people you don't know. Well, let's think through. What if we get there like 5-10 minutes earlier than other people? Will that help? So you find ways to address it, but not avoid it completely. So gradual exposure. If a child is afraid of heights and is going to a party at the top of a tall building, you would, okay, what's our first step? We're just going to go in and check out the building today and see where the building is. They get to the building. They learn, I can go to this building. The next day, how many floors do you think we could make it up today? 5 floors, 3, 4, whatever. Okay, let's do that. The next time, we'll make it up those floors, and then we're going to go stand by the window and look outside. They do that. So each time they master a step, their brains learn, I can handle this. I got through the anxiety and I did it, and they can move up a little more until they get to where they want to be. So gradual exposure is a good way to work on addressing anxieties without not being like, throw them in the pool, but also not letting them avoid and not go to the pool at all. So it's kind of a middle ground. And then really celebrate successes. If you're with kids, working with kids, or have kids who are having anxiety and they do something and accomplish it, really celebrate that. That is so awesome that you went. I know you were so nervous. You sang on stage, even if they did the worst job ever. You did it. That was so brave of you, and I'm so proud of you. So you really celebrate it. And then like, how did you do that? I would have been so worried getting in front of all those people, and you were worried, but you did it. How did you do it? And really like helping them figure out what works. Because kids, yes?
How do you deal with a kid that doesn't want to go to school because of teasing or friend problems? I mean,
yeah. That's tough because there's a lot of aspects to that. So first of all, hopefully the school counselor would be involved in addressing some of the problems going on. But the other thing is that we also really want to, not excusing bad behavior, but we want to build up resiliency in kids. Because there are going to be jerks everywhere your whole life. Even if kids switch schools, once they go from middle to high school, like, there's going to be mean kids. We're adults. We work with people we don't like sometimes. Like, it never ceases out in the world. In the grocery store, the person behind you is being rude or whatever. And so really we want to build up resiliency and helping kids to cope with and handle those things. So a lot of like the self-esteem work and positive self-talk and thinking through that, like, oh, this kid says, well, okay, this is a lot because I do this over time in therapy with kids. So it's not something you're going to like talk and fix in one setting. It does take work on it, but, you know, exploring, helping kids to not have to listen to and believe what other kids say is very important. Easier said than done, I know that, because kids are stubborn. And they really put a lot of weight on what other kids think and say. So we want to help teach them that doesn't matter and that doesn't make it true, right? If someone still says the world is flat, it doesn't make it true. And so first kind of working them through that, addressing the problem, and then also teaching them, okay, how are you going to respond the next time that happens? What can you do? And maybe kind of working your way up. If you get upset, can you leave and go to the counselor's office? Okay, or you can call me. And then the next time that happens, can you go to the counselor's office for a little less time, but go check in? The next time, can you get through the class after that kid's been mean to you? What will you do and what will you say to yourself? And kind of working them through, kind of building it up. And so that's hard, that takes time. So like I worked with a kid at the beginning of this year in middle school who was not coming to school because her anxiety was so bad. She had just moved here, so she didn't really know anyone. So we just jumped right in our first session. We made a step-ladder plan. So when you come to school, she decided she doesn't like people looking at her walking in front of them. So, okay, you'll come to school early before other kids get there. During the day, when you start to feel a lot of anxiety, what are 3 things that make you feel better? One was talking to her parents. One was going to the counselor's office. And then one that we always work on is positive self-talk and encouragement. So she and I both wrote her a bunch of cards. You can do this. You can handle tough things. I know you can get through this. I'm so proud of you. So each day, she could go and pick up one of those cards a certain number of times. So at first, she was utilizing those coping skills a lot. And then each week, we would decrease. So the first week, you can go to the counselor's office twice in a day and do one of those 3 things. The next week, you can go 1 time in the day. The next week, you can go 3 times in the whole week. And so it kind of like weaned her off needing that. And the more that she was able to stay in class and be at school and do that, the more she realized, I can do that. And then kids start to feel good about themselves. Like, I'm really proud of myself. This feels awesome. I stayed at school. I am caring less about what other people think. So kind of working the way up to that. So it kind of depends what the other kids are doing that's happening. There's a line between teasing and bullying, you know, and a lot of things are just what they are. Kids are going to be mean, and we want to teach our kids to be resilient. Sometimes it crosses the line, and the school might need to get involved in that. But so, you know, just school is an expectation. You have to go. But how can we make it easier? What will help you feel better? What can you do when that happens? And when that happens, here's the important part, the reward part, right? I forgot to say, on that step ladder, every week she achieved her goals, she got a reward for it. And so she gets to pick. Kids are more invested if they're involved. So if kids are involved in the planning of like, I can do this, they're more likely to follow through with it than if you tell them, do this. So involve them in the goal, like what is realistic, what do you think you can do? And then involve them in the rewards. And rewards, a lot of them should be non-monetary because we're teaching kids to do this. We're not bribing them. Sometimes we do and it works, but the goal is to not bribe them, but teaching them to do. So what's a good non-monetary reward? A lot of kids like to get out of chores, or if they have siblings, they get to be the one who picks what dinner is or what game they play or what movie they watch. So just finding special things that they would like that you're not like shelling out a bunch of money. Because the stuff kids want now is so expensive.
Yeah.
Their shoes, their video games, holy cow. So, and then reward them for when they achieve it. So kids are not very internally motivated like we are as adults. When I do a good job at work and my boss does a good job, I feel good about that. I don't need her to give me a gift certificate. I mean, I wouldn't mind if she did, I'll take it, a candy bar, whatever. But I do it because I have learned that I like feeling successful. Well, kids are not like that. They're almost all externally motivated, right? So we have to find ways to motivate them when they can't do it for themselves. So have rewards and motivation for when they accomplish that goal, when they make that step.
I think it's important that to go back to the beginning of that, if kids have being bullied, that they have someone that they feel safe that they can talk to at school. I think I mean, I don't know, sometimes those things happen and the teachers don't necessarily know it, and maybe the kid doesn't feel comfortable talking to the teacher about it, or someone, so that there's someone at the school that they feel like they can talk to.
Yeah.
So they can advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
Well, and it might not always be the counselor. Some kids aren't going to have a good relationship with the counselor.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the secretary or...
Yep, someone in the office or a past it's hard with teachers because they might be in the middle of a class and not able to take a break. But like in middle school, if they're on their break and they're able, some teachers will be like, yeah, she can come spend 10 minutes with me, whatever. So you kind of work it out.
I still advocate for dogs.
What?
I still advocate for dogs in the school.
Therapy dogs or service dogs? That'd be awesome. I've
See,
always wanted to have a therapy
every time
dog.
I'm at a school that has a dog,
I've always wanted a therapy
I
dog.
see him.
They have Retrieving Freedom brought dogs into some of the elementary schools for a while, and that was really cool. Kids that you would not expect that were just like a terror sometimes would be in there, like whispering to the dogs, petting them. That was a really neat program.
They use that in Independence Junior Senior High School. McCoy is the dog, and he is a reward too. You can come see McCoy if you're anxious, or if you had a good day, you get to.
Yeah, that's awesome. That
Spend
would
5
be
minutes
cool
with
if that
them.
happened.
That's what I love.
Yeah, having someone that they can connect with, or if they're too anxious to tell someone, okay, let's write a note that you keep in your binder that if you're having problems and you need to slip it to your teacher so no one else knows or hears it, let's do that. So just finding ways to help them kind of get through and conquer that. A lot of times we hate seeing kids suffer, and we want to relieve their difficult feelings, and that's not always a good thing, because they have to learn how to experience and handle difficult feelings and regulate themselves. So I'm sure everyone has seen kids who, if they get upset, the parents are like, okay, fine, you can have it. Well, they're not learning how to tolerate distress. And so that's not actually good for kids. And those parents will be very sad in the teenage years that that's how it went. But so it's okay for kids to be distressed at times, and we don't want to fix it for them. We want to help them learn how to handle it and how to cope with it. learning how to cope and regulate is so, so important for kids because that goes across all emotions that are difficult to have. Feeling angry and frustrated, learning how to control your anger, learning how to control depression if kids struggle with that, control anxiety. So it's just all around good for them to be a part of the planning process and learn how to cope and get through that. What's next? Here's a few resources. I don't have a ton, but this Project Recovery Iowa is super cool. It started during COVID, and it's a Facebook page. So if you find their Facebook page, they do a lot of different things. So they have like training stuff for parents. They have they read a book to young children every week on the Facebook page, but they also have all kinds of support groups for teens and preteens. And so if kids are struggling and don't have others to connect with over struggling with anxiety or depression, this can be a great outlet for them to be able to connect with other people who are experiencing the same thing. Childmind.org is a great website, mostly for parents or professionals working with kids. A lot of really great articles and recommendations, suggestions. School counselors are always a good resource. NAMI is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So Blackhawk County and then also Buchanan County, right, has that. And so they do different groups also for people, relatives, friends of anyone with a mental illness. So those groups can also provide kind of some support, some insight, guidance. So those are a couple. And then there's your local mental health agencies, Abbey Center, Blackhawk Grundy Mental Health Center, whatever's closest to where you are. That's the end of my spiel.